12:30 start?
Either way, yeah.
Sure.
Mother campus.
They always have the best stuff. Right? That's good. That's a good choice.
I stopped by there every month or so, so we have
That's a good one. I like it.
For much cheaper. And it's quality stuff. Yeah, I think.
Sarah, can you stand in front of you?
Oh,
Now, can we have an action shot? A hand model. Gotta have the hand model.
Sarah. Oh, I wasn't taking a picture of you.
We just wanted you to see
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Kill the love.
Come on, Chris.
There's a lot wrong.
Isn't that be real?
Oh,
You had me thinking it was a B-reel. Just credit me making look stupid before I even get started. Thank you.
Well, that was out of the way.
Thank you. Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
We want to thank y'all all for coming here today. This is the result of a lot of work and a lot of research from Sarah. If you don't know, I'm Doug Warren. I was her advisor on just the last part of this. Dr. Torres started off with her and took her through all the hard parts and got through all of that. And by the time I came in, the research was mostly done and she was well on her way. So
Well, thank y'all for being here as well. Here's the title of my thesis. It's The Longest Spring Break Ever, Perceptions of COVID-19 Learning Loss in 34th Grade Students Around the Globe, Across the United States, and Within the State of Texas. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I got into this topic. So I'm a 2020 grad. I know pretty much everyone in the room, so it's not like y'all didn't know that already. And so my last semester of high school, I spent a lot of it at home. And during that time, my mom had a really bad case of COVID. She was in the hospital for several days, and so I kind of took control of my little brother's learning. You remember that? Remember that? Yeah. Made him get ahead, so it worked. But I could definitely see a lack of motivation, and that he didn't want to be there. I didn't really want to be there doing that with him. And then that next, a school year later, my mom went back into the classroom and started teaching, and I remember having conversations with her just about where her kids were at. And she was in 3rd grade at the time, and we were just talking and discussing, and her students, their last normal year of school would have been kindergarten, just between the first year of COVID and then the year after that when learning online was an option. And so that's just kind of how I got interested in it and where we're going with it. And so here's kind of what we're going to go through today. We're going to start off with just the COVID learning loss background. I'm going to take y'all through my literature review a little bit. Then we'll get into the methodology, just kind of what I did and how I went about doing that. And then the results that I got from my research and study. And then just the conclusions that we can get from that. Oh, I hit the wrong button. All right, so we'll start off just with the COVID learning loss background. And so COVID learning loss has been compared to summer learning loss from a lot of researchers. So summer learning loss is from that 2.5 months off of school annually. Just kids are excited for summer break. They have a long time where they're not in the routines and the procedures of school. They're not constantly reviewing and learning new things. And so when they come back, it requires that review of behaviors, routines, and the previous year's content before beginning the new content and allowing for new learning. And that 2.5 months of school off for summer learning loss is compared to the 6 to 9, 10 months off for COVID. The earliest schools would go back, or left school in March of 2020 and would come back August, September of 2020. And so there was a pretty significant gap there, and those were the earliest ones to come back. There were others that had a longer time before returning to in-person. So the areas of loss that I noticed a lot of people discussing were just declines in test scores, and we'll look at some of those in a moment. There was also social performance, since students were not interacting with their peers, interacting with their teachers as much, and they were just confined in the space of their house, which brings in the third one, the movement skills, this one was one that I hadn't heard a whole lot of. But just with unequal access to things like a yard to play outside in, or just having materials to be able to, you know, I have a jump rope, I can go outside and jump rope, or I have a basketball so I can go and dribble or make some shots there. So just some discrepancies there that cause some gaps as well. And then ways that it's being handled, and we'll look a little bit into these more detailed in a minute, is through professional tutoring. A lot of countries are offering professional and school tutoring. And then also resource provision through one-to-one devices, and just ensuring that students have the hardware and the software needed in order to complete school online. And then also just in technology instruction, getting students more used to doing things online rather than on paper. So for my literature review, I focused first on a global scale, and then moved down to in the United States, and then down to Texas. So the first country that I wanted to look at was Indonesia, and the biggest factor there that was influencing it was just the economic factors that limited access to technology and internet. And so they were combating this by offering things like hotspots that people could, the government was providing those so that way the people could have access to those. And then in Russia and Canada, a lot of research focused just on the how distance learning was handled so differently in different regions and provinces, which meant that there were really unique experiences with it. And so that's kind of more what I'm going to lean towards in my research and how I discuss it today. And then in the United Kingdom, they focused a lot on comparing that COVID learning loss to summer learning loss, just on a larger scale as well. And then, move that out of your way. In Norway, the most significant gaps from COVID were discovered to be in younger students. They focused on first graders at the time of COVID. And then worldwide, they looked at these diverse policies, the lengths of time that schools were closed, and just different experiences that created unique perceptions of COVID learning loss. And so we had the longer the closure, the bigger the loss, and that was from one of my people that I looked at. His name was Patronos. He discussed just all of these different places. He looked at that. And then in the United States, we saw that summer learning loss had a connection with food scarcity as well. Or there was summer learning loss, and then COVID learning loss had a connection with food scarcity. So many students rely on school for 1 or 2 meals a day at least. When they're not in school, they're not getting that food, they're not getting the nutrients that they need. And then there was also, people were looking at the vaccine hesitancy, yet there was still, at that time, there was still continued support for virtual options, even though it was clear that there were already learning loss was happening. So then on the Texas scale, I looked at the Texas Education Agency. And so I wanted to start off just by saying some of the legislature that was involved with it. So House Bill 4545 came out, and welcome. So House Bill 4545 allocated funding for a couple of things. Let me scroll down on my notes so I can keep up with where I'm at. So the first thing was the elementary and secondary school emergency relief. Probably aren't very familiar with that term. You may know the term ESSER. So ESSER refers to tutoring that happened to help fill in those gaps from COVID. And so it's professional tutoring, like we were talking about earlier, that takes place in school during school hours to just take care of that. And then there was also legislature that was designed to help keep kids from falling behind grade-wise. So they would continue to push them forward, even if they weren't performing academically, with the hope of filling those gaps in further grades and minimizing the effect of the social impact of falling behind a grade. So up here we can see the Plainview ISD star scores for 3rd grade in 2018, 2019, 2021, 2022, and 2023. Obviously I skipped a year. That's because the STAR tests were not administered in 2020. So we've got the reading scores up top and the math scores on the bottom. As for reading, we can see that right around 2021, there is an increase in students who did not get to the meets level. So STAR is graded on does not meet approaches the standards, meets the standards, and masters the standards. And so these percentages refer to the students that scored at does not meet or approaches the standards. And so in 2021, almost 3/4 of students did not meet the standards. And then this is followed by an improvement in performance in 2022, but then 2023 had another uptick in the number of students who were not passing, and this is the class that was in kindergarten. These third graders that tested in 2023 were in kindergarten during 2020, the 2019-2020 school year. And so we can see the influence that it had on those early years. As for math, we can see the scores were actually pretty consistent and have actually somewhat started to improve since COVID as well. So we'll move on to the methodology. So I conducted my research through surveys. People who participated had the option to complete the survey either through Google Forms or pen to paper, which at the time I didn't feel like was a very important detail. I'll talk about why that was pretty significant in a few minutes, and I wasn't expecting it to be. So I want to start off just by looking at my theoretical framework. I looked at Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So at the time of the onset of the COVID pandemic, these students were in their pre-operational stage, which takes place from ages 2 to 7. And at this time, students are learning a lot about symbolism, and so this is the time when students start to recognize their letters and their numbers. And so they hear the sound B, and they know that they can associate it with the letter B, the written letter B. As well as seeing 5 marbles on a table and associating that with the written number 5. There's also, this is also a time for egocentrism. Students are egocentric, they focus on self more than they do others, which I think we've all had a little bit of experience with that. And this can only be overcome through peer interaction. And so during this pre-operational stage, this 2 to 7, this is when these students were taken out of school. So number one, their symbolism, they weren't getting all the support with that when they're not constantly having that exposure to here's the letter, here's its sound, here's the number, here's how much it represents. And then also the egocentrism, when they're not around people, they're not going to build that understanding for other people and beginning to consider other perspectives. All right, so Plainview ISD had a pretty interesting shift that's kind of important to note when looking at my data in a few minutes. Prior to 2022, Plainview had 6 elementary schools that were all pre-K through 5th grade, College Hill, Edgemere, Highland, Hillcrest, La Mesa, and Thunderbird. However, after beginning in the 2022-2023 school year, they shifted to a model that followed 3 elementary schools pre-K through 4th grade. And so this was all decisions that were not impacted by COVID. These were already in place and already going to happen. However, obviously, the students who were surveyed would have gone to North, Central, or South Elementary. However, they would have been at one of the 6 up here during the time of COVID. Which brings me into the participants. So the teachers were all teachers at North, South, or Central Elementary, and they needed to be teachers during the 2019-2020 and or 2020-2021 school year as well. So they had that experience with COVID learning loss. The students were all 3rd and 4th graders in 2023 to 2024 at North, South, and Central. And the reasons for this was because these students would have been kindergarten students during either 2019-2020 or 2020-2021. And then the parents were just parents of qualifying students that could participate. Keep hitting the wrong button. All right, so limitations that I want to discuss just real fast for the sample size. I had 12 parents, 12 students, and 5 teachers who participated, and this is a mixed methods study. And so this is not necessarily a limitation for the qualitative side of things, since it is so focused on the perceptions of COVID learning loss. However, I do have a few quantitative things that I pull out of it. The validity of these responses would have been increased if I had more participants. Additionally, the time passed since COVID was a pretty significant detail. This survey took place right at 4 years since the onset of the pandemic. My survey dates were February 7th to March 7th of 2024. So obviously 4 years past the infamous day in March when everything kind of started shutting down. And so for parents and teachers, 4 years is not a very significant amount of their life that's passed. But for students, my oldest student participants were 10 years old at the time of the survey, which means that the time since the start of the pandemic and the time when I surveyed was 40% of their life. For the youngest students who were 8 years old at the time of the survey, it was half of their life that they've spent in COVID and post-COVID. And so having a survey that was closer to the time of the beginning of the pandemic would have been a little bit more ideal. However, we're working with a little time crunch here, so. All right, so now I'll get into the fun part, the results. I'm moving the wrong button again. So I want to start off just looking at technology. I feel like this was an obvious impact of the pandemic. So to begin with, 83% of the students that I surveyed indicated that they use some sort of technology regularly at school. The teachers all mentioned using technology, 100%. Either Chromebooks or iPads. Chromebooks were typically reserved for older students as they required keyboard knowledge and using mouse functions over things like touchscreens. And then there were some positive outlooks on technology. One being the technology literacy. We are becoming a more digital world. I've got 3 devices up here running if you need any evidence of that. And so having the knowledge and understanding of how to manipulate these devices and use them for educational purposes is an invaluable tool. And additionally, just the confidence and knowing that they know how to use them. Also, entertainment. It doesn't take long walking around a supermarket to see a little kid watching a YouTube video on their phone or playing a game or something like that to keep themselves busy. I had students who responded that their parents used entertainment as entertainment on technology as an incentive or motivation for them to continue doing their work. However, there was a lot of negative effects that parents and teachers shared. One of them was the difficulty of showing work. A lot of these programs now are really easy to get logged into. I know I've seen a lot of students who, they have a little name tag with their QR code that they can hold up to the webcam, and they're automatically logged into their program. However, accessing an area where they can easily write or fill in information just so that way they can see the processes and understand how they're working, not as common, not as easy to access. Additionally, instant gratification. Where used to, you would have to write everything out. You can hit a button and it automatically has it all for you. And that was a big one that people were talking about was they're getting all this information so fast and it's influencing other things outside of technology. One of my parents discussed having to work with her student on building stamina to even read a whole book. Additionally, just kind of in with that instant gratification is that shortened attention span. And then also blue light exposure. Blue light is emitted from devices that professionals will suggest that you don't use these devices too close before bedtime because it can mess with your circadian rhythm, mess with your sleep, cause your sleep to be lower in quantity and in quality. As well as I had a couple of parents who discussed having their student had an increase in headaches because of their blue light exposure. And so ways to combat this are there are glasses that are protective against blue light now. However, for people who have otherwise decent vision, it's not easy to justify having to purchase eyewear just for using technology. So next I want to discuss handwriting. This was something that I wasn't expecting to get a whole lot of results out of. However, from having the pen to paper as an option for the survey, I got a lot out of it and I think it was really interesting. Hopefully I don't bore y'all too much with this, but for the handwriting, I noticed a lot of just discrepancies that weren't as common for 3rd and 4th grade students prior to COVID, including incorrect capital placement, writing sizing and spacing and just control over the writing instrument. Letters were often confused with other letters. There were backwards facing letters and then just general illegibility. And so I have a couple of examples of that up here for you. So in this top left response. We have a student who wrote the letter J. These are all 4th grade examples, by the way. The student responded and wrote the letter J in jump rope backwards. And then, in addition, the P in rope and in jump are tall enough to look like they could be capital letters as well. In this prompt, we see the student wrote a capital B in the middle of the word tablet. This is an example that's a little bit more similar to pre-COVID handwriting. And then up here, these two are from the same student. These are both from student LX. Up at the top, we can see that there's some backwards facing letters, words are running into each other, letters are running into each other. And then the second example shows poor enough control that the answer is running into the question as well. We can also see an example here of the student was trying to write play with a Y, but the Y almost looks like a lowercase x as well. And so this top one actually, is supposed to say, Miss Davis and my class did with her website. And it took me quite a while to figure that out. And I never quite figured out exactly what the bottom one was going to say. It says, in music we play, and then we can't tell what the rest of the word is supposed to be. All right, so we'll move into what I saw with phonics. I had a teacher who summed it up really well. The phonics gap seems to be the greatest gap I've noticed. Even after returning, we taught using masks, and many students who were in pre-K, K, and first at the time will still misspell and mispronounce several letters or sounds that are similar. And so I know I had one student who responded to a question with simply a tabit, T-A-B-I-T, intending to refer to a tablet, T-A-B-L-E-T, but they failed to pull the phoneme L-O out of the word tablet. And in addition, I had a student respond to a question with maft, M-A-F-T, and reading, R-E-D-E-I-N-G. Reading being spelled R-E-D-E-I-N-G is not as much of a concern, since the vowel consonant E and the E-A spelling both produce the long E vowel sound. However, maft being spelled M-A-F-T is a little bit concerning because of the different F and TH sound. And this is likely due to a couple of things. First being the influence that technology and digital things have on just sound quality. Either hearing through headphones, through speakers, it influences how you hear it. And then additionally, when they came back, the teacher mentioned we taught using masks. So when your face is covered, you lose the visual element for one thing. So they can't see the difference in the pronunciation of the and the with the use of the tongue. And then even coming back after that, the mask still muffled the sound, and so you still can't hear, you can't see, the student thinks that they're saying it correctly, the teacher may not be able to hear to correct it. In addition, another benefit from doing the digital aspect or being able to fill it out pen to paper is that on student responses I was able to see that there was an average of 3.34 spelling errors for students who completed the survey digitally, but for students who completed on paper there were an average of 5.67 spelling errors on the paper. And this is likely due to the fact that students who are completing the survey on a phone or on a tablet or computer had access to spell check. And so it's great to see that they are having significantly fewer, an average of over 2 fewer spelling errors when completing it digitally. However, the large number at the bottom indicates that spell check may be useful when they're on technology, but the skills are not translating over to when they're not using a computer. All right, so then the next thing that I looked at was attention and engagement. And so this was one thing that the vast majority of my parents and teachers said engagement was awful. Students weren't motivated to be part of doing what they were supposed to do for their class. And so just some things that parents and teachers discussed using as incentives or motivation for students to retain their attention and stay engaged were schooling schedules. I had several parents mention that they would bring all of their devices and sit around the dining room table to make it feel more like school, where there's multiple students working all at once to keep each other motivated, like, oh, I'm distracted, and look up and see a sibling working as well. And in addition, we had incentives, things like parents would mention giving their kids snacks, giving their kids stickers. Everyone likes stickers. Or even things like getting a few more minutes to play outside, or like I mentioned earlier, being able to use technology for playing games, things like that. And then additionally, just giving them verbal praise and continuing to remind them, oh, you did such a good job, I'm very proud of you. That all then brings up the question of why was attention so weak? And so the first thing that I looked at were the specials classes. Things like PE and music were often left unaddressed or just weren't prioritized. It would be, oh, we'll send you out a choice board. It's not going to be a big deal if you do it or not. And so these special classes do several things. First, they are learning opportunities for kids. And then they also, of course, get students out of their desks, give them a chance to have a creative or active outlet to just be able to move around and do something different besides sitting in a chair and learning math and reading all day. In addition, we also had the decrease in social interaction. For these students that were in pre-K and kindergarten during 2019-2020, they couldn't do a whole lot on technology, connect to a Zoom meeting, connect to a Google Meet without parent assistance. And so a lot of teachers said, oh yeah, we didn't do Zoom at all because it relied on the parent being able to be there. For a lot of students, they had parents who were essential workers or who weren't at home during those peak hours. And so that social interaction was extremely limited there as well. And students thrive in normalcy, they thrive in predictability. And so not being able to see their friends, their peers, even if it was through a screen, severely hindered their attention span. All right, in addition, I looked at the unique learning situations, which was kind of the whole motivation for looking at the perceptions, was not everyone had the same experience with COVID learning loss. I know it wasn't my favorite thing to do, but I know I had a much easier time with it than my brother did. So the first thing that I looked at was children at home. On average, the parent participants of the surveys had 2.917 children at home. They ranged from 2 to 5 total children, and kids were everywhere from a newborn to a senior in high school. And obviously, newborns are going to need different care than a senior in high school is, so the priorities of the parents vary in that way, for one. I'll just like over here on this one. All right, and then we also have the resource access. 83% of my students that I interviewed mentioned some sort of device sharing and having to coordinate. It's my time to work on my school, you need to go and do something else, and then in 30 minutes it'll be your turn to work on your school. In addition was internet access. Most of the families that I surveyed didn't have issues with internet access, but those who did said things like distance from the city, or just overloading of the servers, or just not having access to it hindered their ability to have the internet access that they needed. There was also parents who were considered essential workers who were out of the house during the day, weren't able to be there to provide for those educational needs of their children, which comes into the next one, which was the teaching responsibility. Like I mentioned, for this age group, most of their learning happened through, we'll send the parents resources and not plan to do any live meetings. And so the responsibility varied from school to school. Sometimes the teacher was more involved, sometimes it was the parents who were more responsible for their students' learning. So with that, I'll get into my conclusions. So I felt like this teacher V summed it up really well. It says this time was hard for educators and our nation as a whole. We had no idea what was happening, how long it would be happening. Families weren't working or were waiting for money to get sent to them. Family members were sick or dying. School was one of the last things on their minds. And I think that's one of the biggest things to take away from this was, yes, it was, COVID learning loss is difficult and it's a gap that we have to fill and get over. But ultimately, like, we can't have expected massive growth during this time. We can't have expected students to come back exactly where they left off in March. That doesn't mean that those are, we can't do things to prepare for it in the future. So if it happens again, knock on wood, trainings. I'd love to implement trainings for teachers, technology training sessions for one thing, through professional development for educators so that way the teachers are comfortable with it, they can help the students be comfortable with it, the students and the teachers can help their parents to know, here's my Google Classroom, here's how this works. here's how this website works, here's how this website works. And then in addition, doing things like parent nights, where they can come up and kind of learn just about their child's classroom and the digital aspects of it, and just how they can support their child in that way. And then in addition, just resource provision. One thing would be, like we talked about at the beginning, with Indonesia, they were offering those hotspots for families to be able to have that internet access if they lacked it. Or doing things like community partnerships where families can know this is a safe place where I can go and be able to bring my device, connect to the internet, and use it at no charge to me. And then this is one thing that I think schools have been doing really well on, is implementing these one-to-one device initiatives to ensure every student has some sort of device that if this kind of thing does happen again, they have something that they can stay connected to their teacher, stay connected with their class, and not have that lack of device access keeps them from learning. And then finally, just we got to prioritize social interaction as well. Like I said, children thrive in normalcy and predictability, and so social interaction has to be prioritized, even if it's in an abnormal setting. I know one of my parents and teachers talked about their students would get excited when they did get to log on and see each other. And it motivated them. Their work would be better when they, after they had that opportunity as well. And so looking at just my suggestions for future research. First, I would just suggest practices to fill in gaps in phonics. This is something that I wasn't totally expecting to get these responses on, but it is something that's really important, especially given that the students who are answering questions with a tablet and math and reading were 10-year-old students, and they should developmentally be beyond this point of having the wrong phonemes in spots. And then also, I'd love to look at the influence of technology more, and just in how it's being used now and what we're able to do with it. And then additionally, I'd love to look at the perceptions of older students and seeing just how those compare to that of younger students as well. And just seeing, for these older students, what their experiences with it were, if it was more comfortable, more easy, and all of that. And so I do have one quote that did not have a good spot to fit in my thesis, except in the appendix. And so if you ever read through it and you make it all the way back there, you'll get to read it again. But I thought that it was really good to sum up just my experience with feeling done, feeling finished. And also just, we're at a spot where it's near the end of the semester. We're kind of all running into the ground a little bit. But it resonated with me. I think you'll relate to it too. I wish they would have included a nap time instead of working on the work so much. I feel like we can all get a little behind that. So, if anyone has any questions, feel free to try to stump me. I like a challenge.
I would like to say, I meant to mention this earlier, Sarah's really on the forefront of this research. If you try to go in and look at COVID learning loss, not a lot has been published yet. So what we're seeing here is brand new stuff.
Well, I was gonna ask about that. Are there plans for publication or other paper? I know you presented part of this at the Alpha Chi convention last year, but you have future plans to use this?
Not at this point. I definitely want to continue to use it and continue to develop and grow it. But.
So what areas of your research look the most promising? What do you want to continue to work on?
I think like the biggest area that looks the most promising for me is just like highlighting the importance of how different these experiences were and how different everyone's opportunity with it was. And like, yes, we can look at test scores all day long and compare numbers, and I'm a math brain person. I like looking and seeing this one's more than this one's less than this one. But ultimately, especially with education, it's so important for us to differentiate and see these students aren't going to all have the exact same understanding. They're not all going to come from the same place. And so I think it's so important for us to look on that scale of they are all going to be different. And so we need to look at them as individuals and not as a collective test score.
Did teachers talk about actually having to change their grading scales or how like the state standards were manipulated during this time and objective versus subjective grading because of the lower standards of the student?
I did not look at anything regarding that post-COVID, if that changed any of their grading scales, any of what they were expecting there. However, I do, like during COVID, I know that the grading, not a priority. If they finished stuff, great. If they didn't, it wasn't the end of the world.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
The first one is looking ahead, like looking forward, and in your own role right now as a teacher candidate, what might be some takeaways that you would say, this probably needs to be brought up in the, early emergent literacy class, or, whatever class, in, educational technology, or whatever, in the classroom? What are some things that you feel like, oh, we need to make sure that our teacher candidates are getting this?
I think a big thing was like just with the technology, knowing what's available and out there for them. That's something, it's probably on me. I'm taking the technology in the classroom class right now. It's a sophomore level class. I was probably supposed to take it a while ago. But I know like I've been blown away at like just all of the things that I didn't know were out there. And so I think that's something that teacher candidates can be prepared for is, here's some things that you have access to, and that we want to teach you how to use and how you can manipulate them and use them in your classroom to provide a better education for your students.
The other question is more of a reflective one for you as an educator, right? What did you learn most about yourself during this whole process?
I've learned I'm a lot more persistent than I thought I would be. Dr. Torres was here during all of the beginning part of my thesis, and I know like I'd come into her office and we'd discuss and talk and everything, and then I'd leave, and like 20 minutes later I'd get an email from the school district saying, no, we don't want to do your research here, and so it was a little disheartening. It's definitely had its bumps in the road, for sure, but I'm very glad to have reached this point, to have gotten here, and I've surprised myself that I've gotten here. So.
I'm not surprised.
Well, thank you all again so much for coming. I hope I didn't bore you too much, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Very well done.
Thank you. I think you're in charge now.
Feel free to grab a lot more cookies or pastries on your way out. Fill up your jugs with the punch. So thank y'all for